Um, I've been studying together with my buddy Ari Greenspan the history of matzah and matzah baking. And, in theory, you'd say matzah baking is something that's what history is there? But as you're about to see, there's a tremendous amount of history. And of course, that history goes hand in hand with halacha. So I'm going to share my screen so you can see my PowerPoint. Here it comes. 1 second. Molly, can you let me share my screen? You're muted.
You should be all set now.
Okay, good. Yofi, thank you. Okay. We are going to be discussing matzah. Can you all see the picture? Okay, I'm going to be using a lot of old images or drawings from Haggadot so we can understand the process of matzah. The Torah tells us that we have to eat matzah on Pesach. We have to make a differentiation between the mitzvah of matzah, which is the mitzvah that eating matzah that we eat at the Seder, versus eating matzah the rest of the week. There's no obligation to eat matzah the rest of the week. So if you don't like matzah, you don't have to eat it. The mitzvah is to have it at the Seder when we make the bracha al achilat matzah. What's the process of making the matzah? So it starts with the wheat. And you can see on the right-hand side here, the guys are winnowing the wheat. The wheat is cut. And as we'll see in a few minutes in a video, the matzah that we have at the Seder, we try and use what's called shmura wheat that's been watched, meaning what? Not that somebody stands and looks at it, but rather from the moment it's cut, absolutely no moisture or water can come on it. In the old days, people would often take the wheat or the wheat kernels or the wheat that they had for Pesach, and before Pesach, they put it in a bag and they tie the bag to the ceiling so no rats or animals would break into it, because a rat has saliva and they're afraid that if there was any sort of moisture, it might start to become chametz. You see here the winnowing, they're taking off the chaff from the actual wheat berry. Modern flour actually is problematic because they actually wet the grains for a few hours, so it makes it easier for them to take the chaff off and to mill the grain. The Ramban in the 13th century discusses the fact that you have to be careful not to bring your grain on the back of a donkey or a horse, because they sweat. And you can see, at least in this Haggadah, they're bringing the grain, but there's some sort of a blanket or something on the horse. I'm not quite sure what the guys on the left-hand side are, but you can see the water mill in the left-hand side all the way. You can see that's how they grind the wheat. And of course, the halacha discusses the fact that it's got to be perfectly dry. And if they were grinding wheat before Pesach, they had to clean the stone very, very well. We're allowed to use one of the 5 grains that are mentioned in the Bible. What I'm reading from is the Rambam. There's no prohibition on account of chametz on Passover except from the 5 species of grain alone. Okay, there are 2 species of wheat, which are wheat and spelt. There are 3 species of barley, being barley, oats, and rye. So those are the 5 types of grain that we can make matzah from. If you mix these things with flour and water, there are natural yeasts that cause it to rise. You don't have to add yeast. We all know that if you mix these things together and let them sit long enough. But legumes, or what we would call kitniot, like rice and millet and beans and lentils, and that which is similar to them, are not prohibited on account of chametz. Okay, that's according to the Sephardim, of course. Rather, even if one kneaded rice and flour, like in boiling water, and covered it in cloths until it rose like leavened dough, which will happen if you mix it long enough, it's permitted to eat. Why? As this is not leavening, but decay. And it's really fascinating because there was an Englishman who did the chemical research on what's the difference between chimutz, the process of leavening, versus sirachon, which is the Hebrew term that the Rambam uses and that they use, which is decay. And it has to do with a particular enzyme. and there's an enzyme called alpha amylase and beta amylase, and one of them is missing in the legumes, and as a result, it can't break down the sugars like it does in flour, and therefore, if you've ever smelt it, it smells sort of rotten. In other words, if you in Ethiopia they eat injera. Injera is a legume. It's not really it's not from wheat. It's from teff, which is their grain, and they let it sit for a day, and it really smells sort of rotten. Shmura matzah, we said, is from the shmura flour, and it comes from this because it says in the verse, you shall guard the matzahs, meaning to say, be careful with the matzah and guard it from any type of leavening. Therefore, the sages said that one must be careful with the flour from which he eats on Passover, such that water not cut upon it after it was reaped, such that there not be any leavening in it. I was once in the fields down near Kibbutz Shalavim, where they were cutting the wheat for Pesach, and I have a patient who was in charge of that. And it was really quite fascinating. They have these huge reapers, the machines that come, and they make a huge, dust and everything. And any field mice that are there, all of a sudden they're running for cover. And like if you've ever been on a boat where they're fishing and the birds are hanging around because they want to try and catch some fish. So there were 3 hawks just sitting up there in the air looking for these mice, and every so often they'd come down. But the machine cuts, and it has a hose, and it's sort of pouring into a dump truck all the wheat. And this was around Shavuot. So we're talking about in June or whenever. June, Shavuot's June, right? Give or take. And there's never any rain in Israel then. And while we were in the field, it was a very sort of cloudy day. And just a little bit, there was just a sprinkle for a minute, but that was enough to invalidate all of the wheat. And the wheat then went to make bread and wasn't put aside to make matzah. Okay, this is the process of making matzah, at least Ashkenazi matzah. You can see on the right-hand side, they're mixing the flour and the water. According to the rabbis, we have 18 minutes from the moment that the water and the flour touch each other, assuming that they're not hot, for the 18 minutes for the process of leavening to start. Now, that's an empirical research that the rabbis did. They mixed flour and water, and they would begin to see certain signs, like the dough begins to get a little bit bigger, of course, but also they can see that you can see the stretching of the fibers inside. There are different signs that they give, but anybody who knows a little bit of chemistry knows that any chemical reaction goes faster if it's hot. And as a result, we're always concerned that maybe from the work of working our hands, it gets a little, it'll become chametz within 18 minutes. So the Talmud says, as long as you're working the dough nonstop, so it's never going to become chametz. You could work the dough 24 hours a day. It's never going to rise. So therefore, we're today, when we bake in my house, for example, and in all other factories, they're very careful that they should never stop kneading the dough. You'll see in a video in a little bit. Then the dough is next, it's a very dry dough. It's next taken, and it's this machine with a pole, you see. It's sort of a kneading machine. Notice the shape of it. It looks a little bit like a guitar, right? So this image from the 1600s is going to become important in the late 1970s. You'll see in a minute why. Then the dough is apportioned. The amount of dough that we need is, when we eat our matzahs, we need a kazayit, which is the size of an olive. Our matzot are much bigger than a kazayit. When you bake, I'll show you, you take even if you take this much dough, bigger than any olive that we have today, you still get a very small matzah. And you can actually see in this Haggadah, in this image from the Haggadah, that their matzos are small, and they're putting the matzah in the oven on the left-hand side. Now, this appears in the Israel Museum. If we go back, you can see the table there, right? And this is the table also in the shape of a guitar, sort of. And this was found in the attic of a shul in Sweden. And I actually did a circumcision in that shul, and I went up to the attic to see if they maybe left something behind. Nobody knew what it was until some Jewish artist or Jewish art historian saw it, and they right away recognized it. They right away recognized it from here. Can you see the pictures? Are they clear for you?
Yes.
Yeah. Okay. And understood exactly what it was. So they knew this is now in the Israel Museum. Okay. This sort of machine or this sort of instrument we'll see pictures of in different sort of constellations. This is from the 16th century Rothschild Miscellany, which is in the Israel Museum. It's a spectacular book, handwritten and obviously hand illustrated. And you can see here in the upper picture, they're mixing the flour in the water. The water is special, by the way. The water is called Mayim Shalanu. Not shalanu like our water, but shalanu, that from the word lan, which means to rest. Right. And that means that the rabbi said, let's have the water sit for 24 hours. This way, we're sure that it's not too hot. We're sure that it's not, not too cold. They don't care about. But this way, we know that we're not adding warm water. We're adding room temperature water to the flour. So it's a special water.
Yes. Is Lanu Shalanu not in the night, that it rested in the night because it's cold in the night? Not 24 hours, but it's cold in the night.
Well, actually, rest overnight. I'll tell you why. Because it's based upon a mistake of Chazal's understanding of astronomy, because the rabbis understood that nighttime, as the sun goes out of, there's an extra kippah above the earth. The sun goes around, and as the earth turns, the sun will come underneath and sort of cause the streams to get hot. That was their perception or their fear. So as a result, we usually have it sit for at least from Ben Hashmashot or before overnight to the next day. But again, that's based upon a different understanding of the astronomy and how maybe the sun might have caused the streams to get hot. So, but nonetheless, that's our minhag, and that's what we do. You can see that they're making holes on the matzahs on the bottom. The woman on the right has a little, or the man on the right has a little tchotchke that is making holes. It's interesting to note there, you can see that there's some sort of a design on that matzah, like circles or something. And actually, I love this because I think you can learn a lot from these old images. That's actually what got me interested in this topic, because the rabbis actually say you're not supposed to be making designs. Why? They're fearful that you might spend too much time working on the design and it might become chametz. And I also find it very interesting that almost every single image that you find men and women working together. This I got yesterday. This is from Ethiopia. My friend is in Ethiopia right now. He's doing conversions for some of the falashmura, those Jews who either converted, whatever their story is. But here you see the women going through them grain by grain in order to make sure that there's no swollen grains. Okay, and this is the tradition that was done. In any event, this was literally from 2 days ago from Gondar in the northern Ethiopia.
Ari, what's interesting in these pictures is the way women dress and cover their hair.
Well, that's in Ethiopia, yes, of course.
No, not only in this one. I'm talking about in the older ones.
Let's see. You're right about that. Let's go back. Yeah, some have different hair covers. Hold on, somebody's at my door. Just 1 second. But Bonnie, you're 100% right. It's fascinating to look at these images because you can learn so much from the social issues and the social things that happened, the way people dress, the way people interacted, and so on. Okay, so now we're looking at the Rambam. We're going to learn some amazing things now. If one needs dough after the time chametz becomes forbidden, meaning it's now Erev Pesach from the 6th hour onward. Okay, it's necessary to be careful regarding the water used to wash the kneading trough and the other utensils used for dough, or the water used to moisten the dough. Okay, and the water which one uses to cool his or her hands. This water should be poured out on an incline so that it will be quickly absorbed by the earth. What's going on? We're concerned that if the water that we use to wash our hands or to, they didn't have running water necessarily, so they had bowls or something with the water, that if your hands had chametz on it or had flour and dough, after 18 minutes, it becomes chametz. But what's so fascinating here, we don't do this today. We mix our flour and water and we have our dough. So what is he talking about? The water used to moisten the dough, or the water which she uses to cool her hands? What is that talking about? So the honest truth is, I knew what it was talking about, but I saw it so vividly just now. In a minute, you'll see this. In Abu Dhabi, where I was last week, there are the very last Yemenite Jews. And what happened was the Houthis, who now control Yemen, which are extremists, they're Shiite extremists. The Houthis they didn't imprison them, but they sort of, these Jews were stuck in their village and they were in a very bad way. Somebody, probably from the United States, got to the king of Abu Dhabi, who took it upon himself to free them. And he sent his airplane in and he picked them up and they brought them back to Abu Dhabi, and he gave them citizenship, which is unbelievable because nobody can get citizenship in the Emirates if you're not an Emirati. He gave them houses, he gave them a monthly stipend, and he gives them cars. It's unbelievable, okay? And we have here about 30 Yemenite Jews that came out of Yemen a year and a half ago. Almost the very last Jews. We could say the last Jews that have left Yemen, because there's maybe 4 or 5 other Yemenite Jews left in Yemen. They're old, and one of them has been in jail for 6 years being tortured. It's another story. So when I was in touch with these people, and I told them I'm going to be in the Gulf and I must see how you bake matzah, because the Yemenites make matzah or made matzah soft. In Israel, you can buy commercial soft matzah, and I've been to all the factories, but I don't like those matzahs. I have real questions about them because they're not made traditionally. They're made in a very hot oven, like an Ashkenazi oven. They just make a wetter dough and a thicker dough. And there's a difference between soft bread that's fully baked as opposed to soft bread that has unbaked dough in it. And if you put the dough into a very hot oven, the outside looks very, very nice and well done, and it feels soft, but my sense is that the inside is not baked. I had to see the way they actually bake it. In fact, I bought an oven, a gas oven from Yemen, literally from Yemen, that is an old-fashioned traditional oven. You'll see in a minute where you put the dough on the side of the wall. And I even brought an old Yemenite woman here to try and show me, and I was never successful. In any event, because you'll see in a moment, they use a much wetter dough. So A, they have water that they put their hands in to keep their hands cool so the dough doesn't get warm because they're afraid of it getting warm. And B, that issue of throwing the water out in an incline. So this Yemenite guy says to me, oh, we throw it out. Our tradition is to throw it against the wall. I didn't know what he was talking about. And now when I was preparing for the shir, I found this Rambam we just read with the water. Now watch what he does. This is the water that his sister used to keep her hands cold. That's their minhag. They throw it against the wall so that there should be, it can't be used and it gets absorbed. I just thought that it's just fascinating. I thought he was like making it up. It's our tradition, he said, to throw it on the wall. And then I see this Rambam that we just read a minute ago. Okay, here's another image, one of many, many images. This is a European factory. You can see they're making the matzahs. And you can actually see that the matzahs are also very small. Also, there's a thickness to the matzahs. Matzahs used to be thick. And all people used to eat soft matzahs. Ashkenazim also used to eat soft matzahs. Now, I love this because there was a magazine in America in the 1800s called Frank Leslie's magazine. And, imagine in a time when there were no pictures, how was news transmitted? So they had artists, and the artists would draw. And, they drew pictures of wars and of battles and of, anything that happened in the United States or around the world. And they had one series of pictures from a matzah factory. And you can see here people lined up, and they're weighing the matzahs. Or maybe the guy on the right's weighing the flour for the matzah, I would imagine. And you can see people lined up with top hats out there, and they're waiting to get their matzah. Now, I'm going to show you a movie. If you can't see it when it begins, tell me, because I might need to go out and share a different screen. No, that didn't work. Hold on for a minute. One moment. Can you see the internet or no? Or can you still looking at my, you're still looking at my, PowerPoint? Excuse me?
We're looking at a PowerPoint.
Okay, so I'm going to stop the share, and I'm going to share again where my internet is here. Desktop. I'm going to show, can you see the desktop now?
Yes. Well, we see
Okay.
your browser.
Yeah, okay, so this is when COVID came, so I got a number of requests or questions about matzah. People were afraid that they wouldn't be able to get matzah. So for our Kulanu groups, Harriet, I made this video and I sent it out, but this is going to sort of give you an idea. Can you hear me? This is going to give you an idea in 4 minutes how matzah is made, and we'll then continue with the PowerPoint.
חדש, מולר אקטיב, גם 25 גרם
Sorry.
חלבון וגם 0% שומן. מולר אקטיב.
No.
שלום חברים שלי, כאן שם.
Ari, we don't have any sound. Are we supposed to?
Okay, you're supposed to have sound.
You might need
Molly,
to start again and push those buttons when you share the screen.
what button do I have to push?
When you go to share screen, there are a couple of buttons on the bottom.
Okay. Thank you. Let's see. Share sound. Thank you for that.
And also share video, both of those.
Yeah, well, yeah. Okay, here goes. You hear the music? You hear it?
Yes.
Okay, let's go back now to my PowerPoint. So my buddy Ari and I started baking when we were 22 maybe, and we've been baking ever since. Okay, so now this is the first known image of matzah baking. This is in Italy in the late 1800s, and that's the same bakery in Italy. This I love. I found this in an archive someplace. This is a matzah factory workers that decided to do a portrait. But in those days, you had to go to a studio to do a portrait. But you can see, look at these guys, look at their faces. Imagine who they are and what they did. And you can see some with beards and some without beards. And it's really quite an amazing thing that they came to do a portrait of their thing. Now, this is the first time I was in Uganda, I taught the guys how to bake. This is actually not my baking, but here you can see how they're doing it. This is from the Abu Yadaya in Uganda. Can you hear it?
Yes.
Okay. Look at his rolling pin, the glass bottle.
Unbelievable. Look at this with a fork.
עוד פעם. רבותיי, זה חדר הקמח. חדר הקמח על עץ המנגו. זה חדר המים. מתחת לעץ המנגו, הכל מקום קריר. קריר. הלש בידיים. לשם מצת מצווה.
Okay, let's go on to the next slide. Okay, now if we saw that the Yemenites are making soft matzah, why is it that we have dry, hard matzah? So the answer is the following. The law is that in general, in all of Jewish law for the most part, if you have something that's forbidden and something that's permissible and they get mixed together, as long as the majority of the mixture is from something that's permitted, let's just use that in general as a general principle without getting into the details. We consider that to be okay. So if I have some milk that gets poured into a big pot of chicken soup and we can no longer see the milk, so it's still okay because the vast majority of it is okay. So therefore, before Pesach, if you have a little bit of chametz that makes its way into kosher for Pesach, it's okay, because if the vast majority of the mixture is not chametz, it's okay. Mali, can I ask you to mute everybody? And if somebody has a question, they can unmute themselves. But this is from the tour in you can see the 13th century. Let me just say one more thing. However, the law is that on Passover itself, even the tiniest bit of chametz is absolutely forbidden. So the concept or the principle of something becoming annulled, if it's only a small amount, no longer exists. So therefore, some people were concerned that it might happen. Therefore, they said, well, let's bake all of our matzahs before Passover. And then should there be anything that's forbidden in it, it's annulled and it's okay. The problem is that if you're used to eating soft bread, if you bake all of your soft breads before Passover, what you have is hard, stale breads. And they're big and they're thick and they're hard to eat. So therefore, someone had a brilliant idea. Let's make all the bread stale. Let's make crackers. So here we see from the 13th century, it appears to me that it's common knowledge that in earlier times, they would not bake all of their matzot before Passover. Rather, they would bake every day of Passover bread for that day. And I saw in Barcelona that there were those who were punctilious, who would bake all of their holiday needs before the holiday, so that if one bit of chametz should fall into it, it would be annulled before there was the prohibition. And here we see my buddy Ari. We baked this matzah. We went to a little town in Israel, and that's Rav Mahmoud, a big Yemenite rabbi. And this man on the right, they still bake the way they used to bake their matzah. Here we can see this is a matzah from Iran. Huge matzot. This is just now from the baking in the Gulf. I went with a bunch of my buddies, came along, and this picture is in Bahrain. I don't know if she joined us, but there's a woman there. This is in her mother's house. The woman, believe it or not, was the Bahraini ambassador to the United States for 5 years. And she served in parliament in Bahrain in the Jewish seat. And she's a Jewish woman. So this is an unbelievable picture. Like, where do you see that? The Kuwait Oil Company with matzah in the boxes. And they even printed up this label, Association of Gulf Jewish Communities, and this is the first matzah bake, and so it goes. Okay, now we're coming back to the Rambam. If the woman kneads the dough, she also moistens the surface of the dough with water before baking it. Okay, well, we don't do anything like that. She should not moisten it with the same water with which she cools her hands. Well, we saw before that there's this water that they dunk their hands into. In a minute, you're going to see it. Because that water becomes warm from their hands and causes the dough potentially to become chametz. Instead, she should have a separate container filled with water, not to cool her hands while she's working, but just to moisten the dough. In these regions, it's not customary to moisten the matzah at all. Nevertheless, if it happened that a woman did happen to, by mistake, use the water, okay, it's okay. Now look here. Watch this. This was taken just 2 weeks ago. These are these Yemenite women who bake the matzah. In Yemen, actually, the women bake the matzot. You can see she's put her hands into the cold water. The dough is it's already been mixed. It's in that blue container. We said that the tradition is not to stop moving the dough, lest the dough become chametz quicker. You notice that he's shaking that container. That's how they do it. And finally, even though we're Ashkenazim, most of us, and we don't eat kitniot, legumes, the brown thing over there that you see in the container is chilba, they're legumes. And they actually paint a layer of legumes on the outside of the dough, on the side that's going to be on the oven, so that it sticks well to the oven. You'll see in a moment what I mean. You see how she put her hands in the water? So she takes a little bit of that stuff, a little bit of the legumes. Look how beautiful. Mamash beautiful. Mamash. מורידים את זה בידיים או מורידים את זה עם כלי? עם הידיים. The guy with the long outfit in the back is one of the Yemenites. It's his sister. לכם זה נראה פשוט, אבל אתה מבין. זה מנהג עתיק. It's an ancient tradition. Yeah. So you have to understand that what you just saw is really, it's a historic piece, because these are the last Yemenite Jews probably that will ever leave Yemenite, certainly the last Yemenite Jews that lived in family and in a Jewish environment, and the last Yemenite Jews to bake matzot the way they did in Yemen. You saw that? Let's go forward. We saw that. This is in Nigeria also. When we were in Nigeria with the Igbo, they wanted to learn how to bake matzah. So we got flour, a regular flour, but they didn't have a clean surface. So I said, go get some banana leaves. So here you see the matzah on the banana leaves going into the oven. Let's see. Can you? Oh, we just saw that. I don't know. Can you see it? We went ahead. Let me go back to the thing. We just saw that video, so we don't need to see it again. Okay, how did matzah machines arrive? In Europe, particularly, not so much in the Sephardic world, but in Europe, in the 1800s and late 1700s with the Industrial Revolution. So people until then lived in small shtetls, small villages, and every village had their own oven that they would make their breads in, and they would kosher it, and they would make matzah, and they could make enough matzah for everybody. But as the Industrial Revolution came in, and people began to leave their villages and move to the cities, and all of a sudden you had millions of people, millions of Jews, or 1 million Jews in a huge city. So it was very hard to provide enough matzot. So somebody in, I believe it was France, in 1840 something, came up with this idea that they'll make a matzah machine. What's the machine? Well, this is one of the earliest machines. It's basically 2 rollers that you run flour into, you run dough into, like pasta machine. And this particular machine is a smart machine because it has dies, round dies in it that simply make a circle in the matzah dough. It's hard for us to understand what a dramatic change this was, because all of a sudden matzah, which had been made the same pretty much for 3,500 years, was made by these newfangled machines. And it caused a bit of a halachic war that raged across Europe particularly, but also across the world. And there were those who said that machine-made matzahs are completely not kosher for various reasons. And there are those who said, no, there's no reason not to use machine-made matzah. One of the reasons they said it's no good is because we said, you heard before, you may not have realized that people were saying the Shem Matzot mitzvah. Just like we have to have positive intent to fulfill a mitzvah, any mitzvah, so too, when we make our matzot, we have positive intent. So we say the Shem Matzot mitzvah, this is for the sake of making matzot. So the question was, well, what about a machine? If I have a guy that's turning a machine handle, is that the same as if he's really doing it? And of course, they argue back and forth. One guy says, what's the difference between a wooden rolling pin and a metal rolling pin that I use a handle to turn? And in fact, this caused so much fury across Europe, and pretty much the lines broke down between Eastern and Western Europe. The Western rabbis, which were, from Germany and France and England and so on, tended to be a little bit more modern and understood the need, and also understood that there's nothing really inherently wrong. Whereas the Eastern rabbis in Poland and Russia, who sort of nothing newfangled could be made because the joke goes it might lead to mixed dancing. Okay, so we have this situation. But how did matzot become square? The answer is that one of the complaints that people had was, if you're making these round matzahs, all the other dough that's left between the matzahs was then taken and put back into the machine and run through it again to make more matzot. But because they weren't always careful to clean the machine, or that this dough that they're throwing back into the machine maybe already was over 18 minutes, so they said that that's no good. But if you make square matzot, then there's no extra dough. There's nothing that's wasted. And therefore, that wasn't one of the concerns that they had. This booklet came out in 1859, called Moda'ala Beit Yisrael, a notice, an announcement to the House of Israel. That was this booklet that came out with the names of 10 rabbis, important rabbis, that wrote vociferous and very emotional responsa saying it's absolutely forbidden to use such a thing, and so on. And quickly, another very great.
We can't see it. We can't see the
Can't see this picture?
Oh, now we can see. Oh, not yet. Okay.
Now, can you
Yes.
see it?
Yes.
Okay, so can you see it now, Bernard?
Yes, thank you.
Okay, so this was printed by a famous rabbi, Shlomo Kluger, and one of the great rabbis of Europe in that time in Krakow. His brother-in-law, of all people, Shol Natanzin, the Shol Meshiv, quickly printed another booklet called Bitul Moda'ah, annulment of the announcement. And this was how this war, it's hard for us to understand how significant this argument was. It was one of the most bitter arguments in the halachic world, and it continued for up to 70 years. Every so often it would come back. Okay, this is a modern factory. The dough is made square. In a minute, you'll see there's a machine that makes the holes. Notice here that there are two belts. There's a light metal belt on the right-hand side and a dark metal belt on the left-hand side. The ovens, which are long tubes that have gas fires in them, are hot. And a belt runs through the ovens. And since we said that we don't want our dough getting warm, we don't want to take a chance that the dough sits on a belt that runs through the oven unless it's ready just then at that moment to go into the oven. So you can see here how the cold belt that has the dough on it drops those matzahs onto the hot belt, which is just now going into the oven. This is how the holes are made with this machine. This is a great picture because this is in Streit's Matzah in New York City, was one of the oldest matzah factories from the 1800s. That's the great Rabbi Rav Moshe Feinstein, who was the rabbi of the Posek, the great decisor of Jewish law in out of the land of Israel in the 20th century. I don't know if you can see it in this picture because it's covered up here for me, but on the right-hand side with him is Rabbi Soloveitchik, okay, who is, the rabbi for most of us who studied in Yeshiva University. And what are these two great rabbis doing here? Well, in those days, this is right after World War II, nobody was baking hand matzahs, and they wanted to have shmura matzah, and they needed it to have proper intent. So once a year, they would, before Pesach, these prominent rabbis would come down in New York City, and they would actually make their own matzot. Can you see the video or no? Can you see it or no? We're still on my.
Okay, what do you have?
Okay, hold on. I want to share this video again.
If you're going to start, Market Basket or anywhere else, you can just pick up the milk from there, so I don't have to go to BJ's.
Could we
just for one item? I'm going to be pretty busy now and tomorrow and Friday also.
Molly, I can't get in. You need to allow me to share. Okay. This is just for a minute or two.
We are the Lamborghini.
Can you see it?
Yes.
Okay. He's starting by saying we're the Lamborghini of matzah.
Meaning of Matzahs. And you're not going to find that anywhere in the world.
Unbelievable.
It's only flour and water. And the best of it. My name is Anthony Zapata, and I've been working at Streit's for 33 years. I was just a kid when I started here. And when I got here, there was a lot of old timers already. Now the kids are working here. It's like, I've seen a lot of families raised in this place. The workers run the factory here. We're here 12 hours a day. We're here more than we're in our own houses. Our wives can't understand it, neither can our children, but we take a lot of pride.
Okay. Let's go back because it's been a long time and I want to finish up. I don't want to keep you too much longer. Then we have some pictures. This is a DP camp in Cyprus. Wherever the Jews are around the world, they have to have their matzot. And here these matzot were sent to the DPs. Shari, can you stop, please? And this is from the JDC archives. This is baking matzah in Berlin right after the war. The JDC, the Joint Distribution Committee, had huge warehouses in Europe because they had to provide the millions of Jews that were struggling to stay alive after the war with matzah. I just love this picture. Look at that little girl. This is in a DP camp.
We're
This
not
little girl.
seeing any pictures.
You
We're not
didn't see
seeing
any? Did you see these pictures?
I'm not seeing the pictures.
Okay, why is that? Hold on. 1 second. Let me try and unshare. Okay, let's see.
Great.
Yes, can you see it
Yes.
now?
Mhm.
Okay, hold on 1 second. Can you see the picture now?
Yes.
Okay, let's go back. Look at that beautiful picture in Cyprus.
Cyprus.
And there's Cyprus, right? The Cyprus had a camp for displaced persons after the war. And this is where the camp was, and this is how they lived. This is from the joint JDC archives. It was the JDC primarily who provided and still provides matzah for Jews around the world. Just now in Dubai, I was there on Shabbat, and we were baking Motzei Shabbat. I came down Mincha time. I was staying in the shul, and there's a man speaking about Armenia and how there's no matzah. And I asked him what's going on. He says, well, I spoke to somebody and they said to me that I have to come here and speak to somebody by the name of Ari Greenspan to help me get matzahs in Armenia. So I told him, no problem. I'll make a call to my patient who runs the joint tonight. And the guy started crying. And sure enough, the joint is arranging for matzah. You should know that it's a big problem this year because there were matzah factories in Ukraine. So much of the former Soviet Union has difficulty getting matzah, including South Africa, I was just told, who got a lot of their matzah from the Ukraine. So this is in Berlin, a matzah factory. This is one of those huge warehouses of matzah that they had. You see that cute little girl?
Mm-hmm.
Okay, so he's putting the matzah shovel in the oven. I just love the faces on these guys. And the man on the left-hand side, well, on the right-hand side, you can see he's got something on his shoulder, the man in the back with the hat. The shoulder is a little patch that's a JDC patch. He worked for the joint. The man on the left is a Jewish chaplain. Now, I was schmoozing with somebody once and I showed them this picture. It was an Englishman and they said, I know this guy, Chaplain Robinson. He lives in Yerushalayim. And I actually went to his house to speak to him, to discuss this picture with him. I just love this. This is from maybe the 1920s, the American Express Company, right? And it says up there in the picture, it says in Yiddish, Geld auf Matzahs, money for matzahs. And it basically, if you use the American Express Company, you could pay money in American dollars and the money would be shipped abroad to Poland, Galicia, Lithuania, and all Germany, Austria. And this way your poor relatives would be able to afford matzot. On the bottom, it says it's great. Almost in every neighborhood or town or village, there's some sort of a train station. It's called Mesilat HaBarzel. And over there, they could go collect the money, and there's an American Express office in such a place. Just an amazing advertisement. Now, the next advertisement is going to shock you. It's from the 1920s in the United States, before the swastika had the meaning for us that it does. This trademark stands for quality. When you see the famous swastika sign, just remember its significance to the fathers. And look at that, whoever did this, they capitalized the fathers and its present meaning. Then it meant brightness, prosperity. Today, it's a symbol of purity and quality. Matzos, when sealed in a carton with this trademark, is pure, clean, wholesome beyond compare. It's made from the best select flour under scrupulously clean conditions, sealed in a dust and damp-proof container. When buying matzos or biscuits, this is the trademark of your surety of purity. The Pacific Coast Biscuit Company in Portland. Really quite an astounding thing. Okay. And this is my last picture. I just think it's amazing. This is before the Ethiopians came to Israel. And he's holding a box of the Paul Hume something, a matzah company. I was in that company. I went to it. It's in France, and it's one of the oldest matzah factories in the world. And I just want to end before we take a few questions. Let's just discuss for 1 minute the meaning of matzah. So we read in the Torah, in the Haggadah, the matzah that we eat. Why do we eat such a thing? We eat it because the dough didn't have time to rise when our fathers were leaving Egypt until the King of Kings exposed himself and redeemed them. As it says in the verse, they baked the dough which they took out of Egypt, ugot matzot, because it was not chametz, it wasn't leavened, because they were gorshu. They were, how do you say that in English? Expelled. Thank you, Bernie, from Switzerland, with helping me with my English. And they couldn't hang out, and they didn't have any food prepared for them. You know, matzah for us is, I call it the last Jewish icon. There probably isn't a Jew that doesn't know what a matzah is. They may not know what a Jew is, but a matzah they'll know. Even in Israel, the vast majority of the population of Israel, well above 90%, sits at a Seder. And the import of the matzah is really something great. I'll tell you just one last story, and then we'll take the questions. The same fellow that I called to get the matzah shipped to Armenia told me that in the 1980s, they were trying to get matzah into Russia. So they agreed to give, they wanted to get food packages into the Russian Jews. They wanted to send 200,000 food packages. So the Russian government agreed they could if they would give another 400,000 on top of that to non-Jews. And the agreement was that the joint could go and deliver these. And part of the idea was to get the addresses and the names of the people. So Usher, who's my friend, told me that he went to this very old lady's apartment. She couldn't really get out of bed. And it was an old-fashioned Russian apartment. It was a very small room. There was no bathroom. The bathroom was in the hall. There was just a little kitchen. And there was a big, like armoire where she kept her clothing and a small table. So she said to him, go into my closet and you'll see something on the floor that's hard. So he went in and he took out this gray, like looked like a rock, he said, and he put it on the table. And she said to him the following: during World War II, I was a fighter pilot. I was a fighter ace. I shot down many Nazi aircraft, but I was not able to keep kosher. And certainly on Pesach, I wasn't able to eat matzah. But I kept this piece of matzah, that's what it was, this gray thing. I kept this piece of matzah with me on the table. Even when I was eating a sandwich, I kept the matzah so that it should be there in front of me. There's something special about matzah and the lengths at which Jews go and the message that matzah tells. So I hope I was able to give you a little bit of a picture into the history and the halacha of matzah. I would like to take maybe 3-4 questions. So I don't know how we choose it. Mali, how do we do this? Anybody have a question? You can raise your hand. Go ahead. Bonnie.
So it's not exactly a question. I'll give a small little piece. That when I was in India with the B'nai Ephraim, it was our first trip, and they asked me how to bake matzah. And we had brought shmura matzah that was made in Israel, sent to America. We brought the box to India. So we thought that was the first thing. Then they said, well, no, teach us how to bake it. Now, what do I know from baking matzah, right? So I went on YouTube. I found the YouTube videos. I bought them the exact rolling pin. I bought them forks to make holes. And they didn't have ovens. They had hot pans on gas burners. And that's, we made our first matzah. And what was really interesting, on Jew Street in India, they had a Jewish book thing. And we looked at the pictures, and that's exactly how they made the matzahs in the old times in India.
There you go. Yeah. Fair. Who would think that there can be improvements? Every year I'm trying to improve. I have an oven outside in my house, literally in my house, a beautiful matzah oven only for matzah. This year, God bless, somebody called me up. They wanted to show me how they make their matzot. And I went, and he had fantastic rolling pins, which I ordered from Amazon. What a brilliant idea. The hard part for people who are not good at doing matzah is that they're not consistently thick, the thickness and thinness, and therefore they tend to burn, and if they're thin and so on. These beautiful stainless steel matzah rolling pins that have rubber bands on the edge that keep a consistent distance between the table. and the thing. Okay, I have 3 questions here that people ask. Please explain. In Israel, they have bread, pita, etc., kosher for Pesach. Okay, so they don't have any bread that's kosher for Pesach in Israel. They have maybe things that are made out of either legumes, kitniot, which Ashkenazim, the custom is for us not to eat, although I have to say that custom is losing a little bit of strength in Israel. They also make things out of matzah meal that look like bread, but they're not, okay? And please explain the custom of taking challah, why it's necessary in the preparation of matzah. Okay. In the old days, when we had the priests and the temple, so we would tithe. We would take a portion of our dough and give it to the priest, let's say, to eat. And the custom is today that we do it in a symbolic manner. And what we do is, let's say you're baking challah at home, you take a pinch, a little bit of the dough, and you burn it in sort of remembering it. However, if you're baking a certain minimal amount, which often happens when you're baking large amounts of matzah, there's actually a blessing that you can make when you do that. So what we do is we put our matzah together and we make a large enough amount of matzah, and we make that blessing. But it's all in memory of that tradition that existed then. I got a question: did the Yemenites in Dubai use salt? Yes, the Rambam says they use salt, and they did put salt in. Let's go 2 more questions, and then maybe we'll call it quits, or we can take more, and whoever wants to leave can leave. But we're going to finish within 5 minutes. Any questions?
I don't have a question, but I must give you such a big yishar koach on an amazing program, and we are an amazing people. I want to tell you, all over the world, and mitzion tetzeh Torah lechol haolam.
Amen. I want to thank Kulanu. Both Harriet and Bonnie are here. They're the leaders of Kulanu. Kulanu is an organization that is sort of the focal point to help all of these emerging communities of Jews that are from the 10 tribes, or that think they're from the 10 tribes, or that want to be Jewish, or that are Jewish in Africa and Asia and so on. And I give a weekly class to a group of people. Yehuda Kalani is here on the thing. Yehuda is a Yemenite Jew that grew up secretly Jewish in Tanzania, where there was a Yemenite Jewish community. And Yehuda sort of came out and has publicly announced that he's Jewish. He built a spectacular shul and a mikveh, and we give a weekly shir on Wednesday, and we're learning.
I'm sorry, they didn't give your name. I'm sorry, I don't have your name.
My name is Ari Greenspan. I'm a dentist in Yerushalayim. So anybody who's interested in joining the class, you're more than welcome. Molly, who works with us in Kulanu, will somehow post how to do it. I don't know exactly how it'll work, but if you're interested, you can get to Kulanu. One more question, anybody? Molly just posted the link to the video, to the Zoom. Yehuda, can you post your email address or your WhatsApp so that anybody wants to contact you, you'll put them on the notice list. This way they can get it. You know how to do it, Yehuda? You know how to post it?
Yeah, maybe just to put it here.
You put the
try
chat.
to put it here. Oh,
where it says chat.
Oh, chat. Yes.
I just want to welcome, we have with us today people, Yehuda from Tanzania, but we also have Israel Oruk from Uganda and someone from Cameroon.
Cameroon.
Yeah. Very good. One more question. I want one more question.
One comment.
Yeah, go ahead.
And wishing everybody a Chag Kosher V'Sameach.
It was fantastic. It was really
Okay,
well.
thank you all for coming. It was very nice to meet you all, and I wish everybody a Chag Kosher V'Sameach. Be well.
Thank you.
Thank you. Chag Sameach.
Chag Sameach.